I used to believe the galaxy was predictable. Civilizations rose, peaked, stagnated, and settled into their quiet corners of the stars, whispering their existence with gentle caution. But the day humanity's voice first reached us, ragged, loud, unfiltered, that illusion shattered like brittle crystal in a gravity well. It began with a tremor across the listening net, a vibration too chaotic to be stellar noise, too emotional to be mechanical. I was a junior xenohistorian then, recently appointed to Monitor Station Veril, a lonely structure suspended in the shadow of a red dwarf. Dawn shift had just begun when the transmission hit our array. The consoles flared gold, alarms rippling through the observation deck. At first, we prepared for disaster, supernova, cosmic flare, some catastrophic celestial event. Instead, we heard voices. Human voices. They did not ask for identification. They did not broadcast caution. They shouted, sang, argued, joked, all layered atop each other in a mad torrent of emotion. Music, primitive yet powerful, wove through reports of weather, sports contests, advertisements for substances that would be illegal in half the galaxy. There was laughter that bordered on manic. There were sirens. There were children's songs. And behind all of it, a hum of roaring engines. No fledgling species had ever revealed itself like this. Most civilizations announce themselves with trembling greetings, universal mathematical constants, and hesitant invitations for communication. Humans instead tore open the void and poured themselves into it with the enthusiasm of a species that had already lost everything once and refused to lose again. Our analysts crowded around the consoles, stunned. Some assumed it was a deception. No young species could be so bold, so reckless, so nakedly emotional on the galactic stage. Others theorized malfunction, perhaps a transmission bleed from some dying world. But I felt a chill stir beneath my carapace plates, something primal whispering that we were not hearing a mistake. We were hearing humanity. Over the next solar cycle, we decoded fragments of their history. What we found unsettled even the elder scholars. Their timeline was a saga of brilliance and devastation intertwined. Empires rising only to collapse into fire, scientific breakthroughs overshadowed by wars that nearly erased their own planet. Yet each catastrophe forged them stronger, stranger, more determined. Their myths glorified sacrifice. Their music embraced sorrow with the same fervor as joy. Their art reveled in chaos and triumph. And they survived again and again. Even now, I recall the holoscreen flickering with ancient human footage. Towering cities built atop ruins, explorers venturing into oceans that tried to kill them, and a peculiar ritual they called celebration, even in the aftermath of disaster. They run toward storms, my mentor whispered beside me. At the time, I didn't fully understand. But the day the first human starship appeared in our sector, clarity came with frightening swiftness. The vessel, designation Odyssey's Reach, breached interstellar medium, not with elegance, but with raw, violent determination. Plasma rolled off its hull. Shielding flickered like the heartbeat of something dying, yet unwilling to surrender. Its engines howled as if dragged from the abyss. Any other species would have retreated, repaired, regrouped. Humans pushed forward. Not cautiously, deliberately. Our station's defense grid activated on instinct, targeting the wounded ship. But the humans transmitted a simple greeting, lighthearted, warm, unfitting for a vessel on the brink of structural collapse. Their commander's voice carried exhaustion and humor simultaneously, as though survival was merely an inconvenience they had endured thousands of times. I watched their ship limp past our arrays, still accelerating despite the strain, still hungry for the horizon, still refusing to obey the natural fear of death that anchors all sentient life. Our council convened that very night. Elder Archivist Talarex presented his findings with a gravity that silenced even the most arrogant delegates. This species does not fear limits, he warned. He replayed segments of human transmissions, roaring engines, chaotic symphonies, sermons about hope, broadcasts where individuals debated their own extinction with startling humor, triumphant shouts from explorers reaching dangerous milestones with inadequate equipment. Humans, he said softly, are not a species. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Fear, fascination, awe. The Council had monitored countless emerging civilizations, but never one that treated the universe as a challenge rather than a mystery. Never one that embraced failure as fuel. Whispers circulated long after the session ended. Some predicted aggression. Others believed humanity would self-destruct before ever reaching our borders. Yet a quiet consensus emerged. We had witnessed something rare, something volatile, something unstoppable, something destined. In the days that followed, more human transmissions reached us, some triumphant, others terrified. Signal fragments of achievements, accidents, celebrations, crises. Even their silence carried intensity. Their presence spread like wildfire across our star maps. And through all of it, a single inescapable truth grew roots in my mind. Humanity wasn't expanding into the galaxy. Humanity was arriving. And every instinct in my being whispered that when they finally stood face to face with the rest of us, the galaxy itself would shift to make room. I had studied 1,000 first contact protocols by the time humanity arrived at our borders, but none of those polished scrolls prepared me for what stepped out of the burning void that day. Everything was meant to be orderly. Lights calibrated, translation arrays primed, diplomats rehearsed to precision. Our star station glowed like a ceremonial lantern suspended above the nebula, ready to welcome newcomers with dignity befitting a rising species. But humans do not enter the galaxy the way others do. Their vessel tore free from superluminal transit, wrapped in a halo of molten plasma, its hull blackened, one engine venting a stream of incandescent debris. It drifted, not gracefully, but defiantly, scarred, scorched, and yet still holding formation with a professionalism that made even our military observers lean forward in disbelief. Their ship bore the marks of recent combat, though no distress call had been issued, no request for assistance, no explanation, as if such wounds were commonplace to them. When their docking clamps engaged, our delegation braced for frightened explorers or wide-eyed idealists. Instead, the airlock hissed open and outstepped soldiers, no, survivors, wrapped in simple uniforms, carrying themselves with the fatigue of beings who had weathered a storm and were already preparing for the next. They moved with a discipline that felt almost reverent, like pilgrims who had crossed fire to reach this moment. The first human to greet us, a woman with silvered scars tracing her cheek, smiled as though nothing about their charred vessel was unusual. Her voice was warm, steady, disarming. "Thank you for receiving us," she said, as if she weren't standing in the shadow of a ship that looked on the verge of collapse. But behind her eyes, something ancient glimmered. I felt it the instant she looked at me, a deep, quiet instinct born from eras of hardship. Not hostility, not fear, something older, like a creature who had survived by always expecting the next wave to hit harder than the last. Their entire team radiated that same paradox: softness layered atop steel, fragility wrapped around resolve. The negotiations commenced in the upper observatory, a chamber of glass arches overlooking stars trapped in the cradle of the nebula. Our diplomats presented offers of cultural exchange, trade lanes, exploratory collaboration. Humans listened with respectful patience, nodding, taking notes, occasionally sharing faint smiles that carried more sincerity than strategy. But it was their captain, Commander Talon Ward, who changed the atmosphere entirely. During a discussion of safety corridors and joint protocols, she leaned back, almost casual, and said, "Please don't misunderstand us. We value safety." The chamber quieted. She continued, "Where we come from, comfort makes us weak." Those words hung in the air like a solar flare frozen mid-eruption. Even the translators seemed hesitant to project them across the room, as if worried they carried a weight beyond syntax. Our delegation exchanged glances. Pressure? Hardship? Challenge as virtue? It contradicted every foundational principle of interstellar development. Species sought stability to grow. They sought peace to prosper. But these humans, they treated danger like a crucible, a forge. Their captain spoke calmly, without pride or arrogance. She explained that her people advanced not by avoiding risk, but by embracing it. By stepping into storms instead of waiting for them to pass. By forcing their limits until limits failed to hold them anymore. Some in the council whispered that such a mindset was pathological, self-destructive. But as I studied the humans seated across from us, scarred yet hopeful, disciplined yet curious, I sensed no madness, only conviction, only purpose. Only the unmistakable gravity of a species that had shaped itself against adversity until adversity became their teacher rather than their enemy. Yet despite this intensity, their gestures were gentle, their words often sprinkled with humor. They spoke of alliances, of curiosity, of building something greater together. Hope sat beside their ferocity, an impossible pairing that made them feel both more dangerous and more trustworthy. Humanity was a contradiction that defied classification. As the session closed, the humans rose and offered formal bows, small, precise motions meant to honor our customs. The captain caught my gaze once more. "I hope we move forward together," she said. "But if we don't," she hesitated. For a heartbeat, the fire inside her eyes softened. A chill rippled down my spine. That day, as their damaged ship undocked and drifted toward the shimmering lanes of our upper orbit, I realized something with crushing clarity. Peace with humans was possible. But simple peace? Predictable peace? A peace we could control? Never. Not with beings who carried storms inside their bones and believed the universe existed to be challenged. We had spent entire generations preparing for the day humanity would ignite a conflict. Their intensity, their volatility, their hunger for challenge, every analyst predicted that if war arrived, humans would be the spark. But the galaxy is rarely so predictable. The irony, when it finally came for us, felt almost cruel. Humanity did not bring war. War found them. It began with a shudder in the deep void corridors of our long-range networks. Alarms rolled through our stations like distant thunder. The Korth Dominion, ancient, merciless, swollen with conquest, launched coordinated strikes against 5 frontier civilizations. Their fleets appeared without warning, shimmering out of compressed space like blades drawn from a sheath. They cut through our defenses with mechanical precision. Worlds fell screaming before dawn cycle had even begun. Our communications grid flooded with desperate calls, detonating atmospheres, ruptured shields, orbital habitats cracking under kinetic fire. The Dominion advanced with terrifying efficiency, leaving behind nothing but silence and drifting debris. We scrambled to deploy our reinforcements, but the routes were blockaded, our fleets too distant, too slow. Humanity, by all rights, should have stayed away. They had no treaties with us, no alliances. Barely more than a handshake and a few diplomatic courtesies. And yet, they arrived first. 3 human strike groups burst into our embattled sector, engines burning blue-white, hulls still scarred from their own recent conflicts. They didn't request permission, didn't demand gratitude. I remember the stillness that followed. Our commanders hesitated, caught between fear and disbelief. Human vessels were smaller than Korth warcruisers, their armor inferior, their numbers laughably insufficient. But something in those 2 words carried the weight of inevitability, a tone that said, "We will not be moved." The first human volleys were not elegant. They were not strategic masterpieces. They were a declaration. a roar across the void. Then chaos erupted. Humanity fought not like scholars of war, but like survivors of it. Their tactics defied every doctrine we had ever studied. Retreat was not their instinct. Adaptation was. Determination was. That terrible, radiant refusal to yield. Where other species prioritized preservation, humans prioritized victory, believing survival would follow only if the enemy broke first. Their ships performed maneuvers that our pilots deemed suicidal, ripping through debris fields, skimming weapon blasts so closely their hulls glowed red. When Korth cruisers attempted to flank them, human captains ordered full-throttle intercepts, ramming enemies with engines still burning. Alarms screamed as metal shrieked against metal, but the humans boarded the crippled vessels before the shockwave dissipated. Hand-to-hand combat, in vacuum-sealed corridors, against warriors bred for strength and brutality. I watched the feeds, horrified and mesmerized. Human squads emerged from firestorms with armor half-melted, oxygen warnings flashing bright crimson, yet their movements remained steady, relentless. They advanced even when plasma scorched their suits, even when shrapnel tore into their limbs, even when every biological metric suggested collapse. But that was not the full truth, because amid the destruction, humanity displayed a second nature, one so gentle, so dissonant with their savagery in battle that it left us deeply unsettled. Human pilots shielded escape pods with their own bodies. Human medics crossed burning halls to rescue enemy wounded. Human engineers jury-rigged emergency oxygen lines for civilian transports even as Korth artillery closed in. They were monsters to their attackers, angels to their allies, and they transitioned between those roles with terrifying ease. We had always feared that humans possessed too much potential for violence, but no one predicted the far greater threat they represented: limitlessness. When their ammunition depleted, they fashioned weapons from scrap metal, coolant tubes, and explosive fuel cells. When their ships sustained fatal damage, they converted them into guided missiles, evacuating crews moments before impact. When Dominion forces attempted psychological warfare, broadcasting the fall of allied worlds, humans responded with laughter, not out of disrespect, but out of defiance so absolute it bordered on madness. The first major turning point came when a human boarding team, presumed dead after a reactor breach, emerged 20 minutes later dragging prisoners and carrying salvaged Dominion weapons. Their armor was fused in places, their visors cracked, their vital readouts erratic. But they were alive, and still advancing. I had no answer. By the end of the third day cycle, the Korth assault faltered. Not because reinforcements arrived, not because strategies evolved, but because Dominion commanders began to fear the humans. Fear a species that did not break, did not retreat, did not succumb to despair. A species that responded to overwhelming odds not with surrender, but with creativity, with rage, with unity. The war learned humanity's name, and flinched. As the Dominion pulled back, their surviving ships limping toward dark space, the humans did not celebrate. They turned immediately to rescue operations, clearing rubble, stabilizing orbiting habitats, helping species they had met only hours prior. They saved us, not because we were allies, not because we had earned their loyalty, but because the humans had made a decision the moment they entered our skies. If the galaxy burned, they would stand in the fire so others did not have to. And as I watched them moving through the wreckage, bloodied, exhausted, unstoppable, I realized the truth. The war had not shaped them. No conflict could. We had spent decades studying human warfare by then, at least what we thought was human warfare. Their recorded battles were noisy affairs, saturated with overlapping voices, shouted orders, gallows humor, and an almost ritualistic exchange of insults with both allies and enemies. Their tactical networks looked chaotic to us, a mess of unfiltered emotion and sensory overload. But to humans, the noise was order. It was how they kept each other grounded, how they distributed fear so no single soldier carried too much. Noise, to them, was life. That was why, during the siege of Drexion Gamma, the silence hit us like a gravitational anomaly. Human infantry had been entrenched along the western ridge, an exposed, unforgiving stretch overlooking the canyon floor where the Korth Dominion had positioned artillery platforms. For hours, the humans endured orbital barrages that pulverized the ridge into powdered soil. Through it all, their comms remained active. A constant stream of chatter filled the command channel. Humans sang old Earth marching songs. They joked about the Korth's aim. They traded weapon diagnostics, childhood memories, threats of what they'd do after the operation, and far too many comments about food for beings under active bombardment. Then, with no warning, the channels snapped to dead quiet. No static, no screams, no final messages. Just an absolute, suffocating void. Our analysts immediately flagged it as catastrophic loss of life. The humans surely couldn't have survived the last impact, not with their fragility, not with their biology so vulnerable to blunt force trauma and thermal shock. But the forward sensor arrays told a different story. Heat signatures still moved along the ridge, slowly, steadily, advancing toward the Korth batteries. Our observers zoomed in. What they saw became required study for every military academy in the Alliance. The humans were not dead. They were not even struggling. They were walking, advancing through smoke and falling debris with the calm, deliberate posture of workers performing a familiar task. No shouting, no commands, no communication at all. Their formation tightened, their breathing synchronized, and their movements sharpened with almost surgical precision. We had no term for what we were witnessing. The closest approximation our psychologists produced was collective resolve cascade, a phenomenon we had never observed in any species outside humanity. Later, survivors explained it to us with unsettling simplicity. When everything hurts and everything is falling apart, we stop wasting breath, we stop wasting fear. Another soldier, still wrapped in med gel, added, "When we go quiet, it means the decision's already been made. We're doing the thing." Humans, we discovered, possess a trait that others in the galaxy simply lack: the ability to shut down fear without shutting down function. Most species descend into panic or paralysis. Humans descend into a state of sharpened purpose. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's compression, every volatile emotion folded inward until what remains is a blade. During the final moments of the Ridge assault, Korth troops reported seeing human soldiers rise from craters with broken visors, shattered armor, and burns that should have incapacitated them. Yet they moved as if carved from the battlefield itself, silent, inexorable, unbound by hesitation. The Korth commander later admitted under interrogation, "We did not retreat because they were killing us. We retreated because we realized nothing we did mattered." Humanity forced the Korth to abandon the ridge in 43 minutes, an objective the Council simulations deemed strategically untenable, even with triple the manpower. The humans suffered grievous injuries, but almost no psychological breakdown. Afterward, as medics triaged the wounded, the chatter slowly returned, light, exhausted, as if waking from a trance. But the silence stayed with us. During the post-operation review, the Council assembled a multi-species behavior panel to evaluate what had occurred. Their conclusion reshaped interstellar military doctrine. Human quietude correlates with a 600 to 900% increase in mission completion probability, regardless of opposition strength. It also correlates with a 300% increase in operational lethality. More importantly, the emotional suppression that humans perform during this state makes them less receptive to external commands, including retreat orders, ceasefires, or directives to preserve infrastructure. They are not out of control, they are simply uninterruptible. The Council immediately drafted a sector-wide protocol. It took a single meeting to name it: Alert Sigma Black. A warning that if human forces suddenly fall silent, all Allied units must either reinforce them with overwhelming support or withdraw entirely to avoid collateral escalation. Communications officers should attempt contact only if essential, as interrupting humans in this state can lead to unpredictable reactions. Commanders must prepare for a shift in battle tempo. Humans will complete their objective with disregard for losses on either side. The alert spread through the alliance like a whispered legend. Some officers believed it exaggerated, others called it superstition. But those who fought alongside humans knew otherwise. Silence, in most armies, is defeat. In humanity, silence is the threshold where fear ends and something older, harder, and far more dangerous begins. And so we learn to fear not the roar of humanity in battle, but the moment the roar stops. The final confrontation with the Korth Dominion was expected to drag into a protracted, attritional nightmare. The Council predicted 7 cycles of conflict, minimum. Supply lines would crumble, fringe colonies would burn. Entire star systems would shift ownership dozens of times as the tides of war rose and fell. Everyone, strategists, analysts, even human advisors, believed the Dominion would only fall through slow suffocation. But they had not accounted for the simple, terrifying truth of the species they had allied with. Humans do not strangle their enemies, they break them. The assault began at 0400 Galactic Standard, when the Dominion's border arrays detected a single, seemingly isolated human cruiser emerging from hyperspace. The Korth prepared to intercept it, only to realize the vast majority of the human fleet was not appearing at the border at all. They were materializing inside the Dominion's inner defense sphere, threading their way through a labyrinth of gravity wells and minefields that should have been impossible to navigate. Every species watching the tactical feed asked the same question: how did they do that? Later analysis revealed the answer. They didn't follow a path through the hazards. They made one. The human flagship, Resolute Mercy, performed a hyperspace microburst so dangerously precise that most species' navigational computers would refuse to run the calculations, let alone execute them. But the humans had something the computers did not: pilots who viewed the concept of risk as a malleable suggestion rather than an immutable limit. They emerged from hyperspace less than 2,000 meters above the Dominion's primary command station, its shields still cycling from the gravitational shock. Before the Korth could react, human boarding torpedoes were already punching through armor plating. It was not a battle, it was an incision. From there, everything unraveled for the Dominion. Human fleet movements broke every rule of military predictability. They flanked through radiation storms, charged into crossfire, executed maneuvers that shredded their own hulls yet preserved their momentum. Korth simulations collapsed instantly. Every model returned errors, every tactical forecast dissolved. Humanity's approach to warfare didn't align with logic the Dominion understood. Their formations shifted not in orderly patterns, but in something resembling instinctive choreography. It was war as a living organism. Inside the stations and carriers, the story grew even more nightmarish. Human Marines advanced with a refusal to fall that bordered on myth. Some reports described soldiers dragging themselves forward on broken limbs, firing one-handed while the other arm hung uselessly. Others described medics who treated allies and enemies under fire, then charged back into the fray, with blood, sometimes their own, sometimes not, still dripping from their gloves. To the Korth soldiers, it felt like fighting an enemy whose pain only sharpened them. One Korth survivor, trembling in a medbay afterward, managed to describe the moment his unit broke. They looked at us as if the battle was already over. Not because they were winning, but because they had decided they would. We were fighting for survival. Human commanders spoke in tactical channels of defending the innocent, ending the threat, securing the frontier for all free peoples. Their words were noble, sincere, inspiring. But their soldiers, the ones bleeding, burning, pushing forward inch by inch, spoke differently. That sentiment spread through the units like a quiet oath. It built a momentum no doctrine could replicate, no empire could withstand. Humanity was not fighting to win. They were fighting to finish something, to cauterize a wound in the galaxy that had festered for far too long. The turning point came when the Dominion's high shield fortress, a structure considered impregnable, fell in 47 minutes. The Korth defenders watched in disbelief as the humans tore through the outer decks, bypassed sealed corridors by blowing open ventilation shafts, and countered automated turret algorithms by sacrificing empty shuttles as decoys. They fought with strategy, yes, but also with a willingness to pay any price in exchange for progress. Some species pay costs reluctantly, others pay strategically. Humanity pays in advance. By the 6th hour of the assault, Dominion command networks were collapsing, not because of casualties, but because of fear. Entire battalions surrendered without firing, fleets retreated without orders. Officers abandoned posts in the belief that if humans reached them, resistance would be meaningless. Even the Emperor of the Dominion, isolated in the Imperial Bastion, realized the truth. The war had not turned, it had ended, and the humans were merely walking through the final motions. The ceasefire was signed in a cavernous hall carved from mirrored obsidian. Delegates from 50 species attended via HoloLink, but all eyes were fixed on the Emperor and the human envoy facing him, Captain Lyra Selene, who still bore raw burn scars across her hands from breaching the high shield fortress. The Emperor, defeated yet composed, studied her for a long moment. Captain Selene did not answer, not because she refused, but because she couldn't. No human ever answered that question the same way twice. The Emperor lowered his head, understanding the truth far too late. Humanity is not defined by what it is. Humanity is defined by what it becomes, and by what it refuses to become again. To this day, even we, who fought beside them, who watched them burn and rise and break the unbreakable, still do not fully know. The galaxy waited. After the fall of the Korth Dominion, every species braced for the inevitable. We expected conquest, retaliation, the slow, grinding enforcement of human dominance. Analysts calculated likely expansion corridors, resource claims, and occupation strategies. Entire sectors repositioned fleets in anticipation of the humans' next move. Fear, as it often does, filled every strategic mind. And then, nothing. Humanity did not seize the Dominion worlds. They did not declare territorial supremacy. They did not demand tribute or extract vengeance for the countless lives lost during the war. Instead, they began to rebuild. I traveled aboard the Aegis Unity, part of a human-led reconstruction fleet, and witnessed something that confounded all expectation. Human engineers were the first to land on battered Korth stations, working in tandem with Dominion personnel not to punish, but to restore. Medics treated civilians and former combatants alike, carefully patching wounds that only hours ago had been lethal. Supply convoys carried food, clean water, and medical kits into sectors that had been declared lost causes by the galaxy's bureaucracies. Their commanders issued no grand proclamations. They offered no lectures on justice or morality. They simply acted, guided by an ethic that made little sense to other species, that the preservation of life, even that of enemies, was a measure of true strength. Some alien observers expressed outrage. How could beings who had burned through fleets, boarded impregnable fortresses, and killed without hesitation now choose mercy? How could the same species that instilled terror with a glance now comfort grieving families in the rubble? Their words were not empty rhetoric. They carried a weight born from history, human history, steeped in cycles of pain, rebellion, and survival. Unlike most species, humans seemed perpetually haunted by the cost of their own past, determined to break the cycle of destruction before it could claim them. On one moon, where former Korth children wandered among ruins, humans dug gardens into the ashen soil, teaching them how to plant seeds that would grow into food. On a shattered orbital station, engineers repaired life support systems, while human soldiers lifted debris from collapsed corridors, singing softly as if to reassure the ghosts of those who had fallen. I watched one veteran, a Marine whose armor still bore scorched scars, kneel beside a small Korth child, helping her tie a bundle of emergency rations to her back. The same hands that had launched boarding torpedoes now offered comfort, steadied trembling shoulders, and wiped tears. It was impossible to reconcile the duality: fire and warmth, destruction and healing, monsters and angels. Humans could obliterate entire fleets, yet cradle the innocent in their arms moments later. They could wield war as a tool, yet wield mercy as a force even stronger. I came to understand that this duality was deliberate. Humanity's capacity for violence was matched almost symmetrically by their capacity for compassion. One tempered the other, and perhaps that was the ultimate reason the galaxy both feared and revered them. They were a species constantly at war with themselves, always choosing again and again to rise above the limits of their nature. Even the Korth, once enslavers and conquerors, found themselves bound to this ethic. Under human guidance, they rebuild settlements alongside former victims, learning not just to survive, but to coexist. Some resisted at first, suspicious of the generosity of beings who had once shattered their fleets, only to discover that the humans' intent was unshakable. Mercy was not weakness, it was a principle, a force as absolute as any weapon they had ever wielded. As I walked through the devastated zones, witnessing humans comforting the wounded, repairing starports, teaching children, I realized something profound. Their ferocity had saved the galaxy. Their compassion reminded us why it had been worth saving. And in that duality, I glimpsed the true essence of humanity. They are not merely warriors, they are not merely survivors, they are beings who define themselves at the intersection of extreme violence and deliberate kindness, capable of terrifying destruction and breathtaking grace. No conqueror before them had ever commanded such power without corrupting it. No species before them had ever stood so close to annihilation and chosen mercy as an act of strength rather than weakness. It is in this choice that humanity's greatest lesson lies, that power alone is meaningless without restraint, and that the measure of a species is not how it dominates, but how it redeems. And in that moment, as I observed humans lifting broken worlds and fractured spirits alike, I understood why the galaxy continues to watch them in awe, fear, and admiration. They are fire tempered by warmth, a storm guided by conscience, a species whose potential defies understanding, and yet chooses every day to be more than the sum of its violence. Even now, long after the Dominion fell, I cannot forget the paradox. Humans could have burned the galaxy to ashes. Instead, they rebuilt it. And that choice, that terrifying, awe-inspiring, incomprehensible choice, made them something more than conquerors. It made them a force the universe had never seen and may never fully understand. Long before humanity had officially stepped into the Council's chambers, long before their fleets punctured the void with fire and determination, small, quiet committees within the Council began to compile what would later be known as the Human Files. These were secret archives, compiled with meticulous care, cataloging everything observed, heard, or intercepted about humans. Analysts pored over decades of transmissions, dissected cultural artifacts, and studied the scars of countless internal conflicts. They traced human history from primitive world wars to planetary unifications, from religious upheavals to technological revolutions. They cataloged myths, literature, songs, even childish games, and each document told a story of contradiction and audacity. The humans were fragile. Their bodies could be broken, their planets vulnerable, their defenses rudimentary. Yet, time and again, they exhibited fearlessness that defied logic. They were divided politically, socially, and ideologically, yet remained unbreakable when faced with existential threats. They fell into despair, into cycles of self-destruction, yet somehow consistently found hope. Their culture was suffused with celebration of sacrifice, resilience, and the audacity to act against impossible odds. As the committees delved deeper, a pattern emerged, a gravitational pull that seemed to bind the species toward feats other civilizations considered improbable or outright impossible. Humans were not merely reactive to circumstances, they actively shaped them, drawing themselves toward danger, challenge, and the edge of their capabilities. Observers began using the term emotional gravity, a force unseen but undeniable, tugging the species toward action that could alter galaxies. Predictions became increasingly conflicted. Some analysts proposed that humans were destined to lead, to become a guiding force among the stars. Others warned that their unpredictability, their willingness to embrace suffering and chaos, could make them a vector of destruction. Every hypothesis, however, concluded with a single inescapable truth: humanity was a catalyst. Their presence, their choices, their very survival would change everything they encountered, whether for better or for worse. Counselors debated endlessly about how to engage the species. Should they be courted, monitored, contained? Some argued that intervention would stifle their potential, while others feared that leaving them unchecked could unleash consequences no one could endure. The archives grew, layer upon layer, each report adding a new lens of awe, fear, and meticulous fascination. It was not a prophecy, not exactly. It was a calculated certainty born from observation and deduction. Humanity's influence would radiate outward, reshaping alliances, philosophies, technologies, and conflicts. Their reach would not be enforced solely by military might, but by the ripple of their presence, the way other species measured themselves against them, feared them, and aspired to emulate them. Even now, the archives remain sealed. Only a handful of council members know the full extent of the predictions. The rest are shown summaries, sanitized to prevent panic, to prevent interference. Yet the files themselves, predictions, fears, analyses, warnings, sit in subterranean vaults, humming quietly with the weight of inevitability. They record not just a species, but a phenomenon, fragile yet fearless, divided yet unbreakable, prone to despair yet masters of hope. A species whose emotional gravity can pull the galaxy toward impossible feats. And the warning is clear, though silent. Humanity is not merely another species among many. Humanity is the force that will shape the cosmos. For those who know, the question is no longer if they will change the galaxy. It is how, and whether the galaxy can endure the brilliance of their fire.